Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be with you. My name is Ostap Kushnir. I'm assistant professor at Lysiak University in Warsaw. And not so long ago, I wrote an article about Lysiak-Rudnytsky and his concept of non-historical nation. And through applying that concept, I attempted to explain the political regularities which are taking place right now in Ukraine, political processes, and to a certain degree, political crisis. It all started with my fellowship. So I was awarded Kolaski Visiting Research Fellowship at the CIUS, Canadian Institute for Ukrainian Studies, where I had an honor to spend a couple of months in summer and interact with scholars there. So at the end of this this fellowship, I finalized my book on the interwar Ukrainian geopolitics, so hopefully to be published soon in Canada. And simultaneously, I started looking at the Canadian Ukrainian scholars, Canadian Ukrainian historians. And I discovered that there are a lot of them whom actually I didn't know before, or I didn't know about all of their elaborations, all their findings. And Lysiak-Rudnytsky was one of those, was one of these scholars. And at the same time, when I stayed in Edmonton at Canadian CIUS, I discovered for myself Forum for Ukrainian Studies. So that was an online journal which publishes insights into Ukrainian policies in contemporary Ukrainian studies. And I decided to become a contributor there. So up to now, 2 of my articles have been published, but I'm looking forward to increase the number of my publication because I see the space here and it's very interesting to me, and I'm very grateful for the community, the Ukrainian community of Edmonton, for hosting me, and I had much fun and productivity. It was a great time there. But again, before we get into the topic of the article, I just would like to briefly let you know about whom Lysiak-Rudnytsky was. He was a prominent historian, yes, and he worked in many universities in United States, in Canada. He was one of the co-founders, considered to be co-founder of CIUS. And then his concepts are right now widely used in Ukrainian historiography and history by numerous scholars. He also wrote around 200 articles, which is quite productive, I should say, as for the scholar. So I'm personally impressed. And he was one of the person who was probably the one who introduced the concept of non-historical nation into the political and historical discourse. And this is the concept which actually I'm working with right now. And this is the concept which actually was used by me in this book, in Ukrainian Russian New Imperialism. So this is my book, and in particular, I'm explaining the processes taking place in Ukraine today through applying the concept. And the article I wrote specifically emphasizes this. So now let us speak about article itself. It dates back to 1963. In Slavonic Review, Lysiak-Rudnytsky wrote an article which is called The Role of Ukraine in Modern History. And that is where he defined Ukraine as one of the non-historical nations. By defining that, by naming Ukraine non-historical nation, he meant the following, and quote, non-historicity in this meaning does not necessarily imply that a given country is lacking a historical past, even a rich and distinguished past. It simply indicates a rupture in historical continuity through the loss of the traditional representative class. So what we can see through that definition is that actually Ukraine as such, as the territory, yes, had its history, but as a state, it lacked this nation building spirit, state, the feeling of the state, the feeling of statecraft, the connection between governing elites and the people. And that is where the gap in Ukrainian statecraft resides. And that gap, actually historical gap, the lost or the missing connection between the elites and the people, is what continues fueling the processes in Ukraine today. Over the centuries, Ukraine actually did not manage to elaborate the tradition, the indigenous tradition of governance. What is taking place today in Ukraine, this is the attempt to actually to catch up with time, to cover up that gap in nation building, in statecraft within the recent 25 years. And that, I mean, that time span that the statecraft experience in other states, which are so-called historical states, it lasted much longer. It lasted for centuries. So Ukraine right now is trying to catch up with time and catch up those, so-called historical nations. This is where Ukraine undergoes the processes of formation of its national identity, national understanding, of its understanding of statehood, of its political tradition. So we have today in Ukraine, millions of people living with a very diverse background, with very diverse historical background. So their political cultures and traditions, they were shaped by numerous empires, by numerous other states, foreign rules. And apart from that, as Lysiak-Rudnytsky mentions, if you look at the history of territories which constitute contemporary Ukraine, I mean, you have a very vast steppe zone, which was populated actually only in the 18th century. So the political tradition, the social relation, system of social relations, system of governance in the so-called steppe Ukraine is comparatively young and is different from what was the experience of the so-called left bank Ukraine or the right bank Ukraine. So in the parts of Ukraine which were influenced by Polish and by Russian rule. This is the catching up with time. The non-historicity in this understanding is trying to invent mechanisms which are the most representative and the most efficient in Ukraine for executing political governance and for securing, for establishing productive interpersonal and social relations. So, and because Ukrainian society is so diverse, because Ukrainian society it consists of so many ethnic groups with so many language, religious preferences. It is really diverse, and also because Ukrainian society had different histories depending on where people live, under what foreign rule they live. You have that turbulence in the statehood and statecraft. You have that sort of bandwagoning between ideas, political preferences, which can be actually observed in any new round of elections. Yeah, so how people change their affiliations and attitudes toward this or that political powers. What I'm actually working on right now, and that has also the relation to Lysiak-Rudnytsky's non-historical concept of non-historical nation. I'm working on political symbolism. So I'm trying in the understanding of Eric Vogelin. So it's important to stress. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to go beyond the divisions in language, in culture of people who live in Ukraine, but I'm trying to define their visions of justice and order. So how does society in Ukraine perceive, or the parts of the society in Ukraine perceive the vision of justice and order? How the political space should be organized? What is right and what is wrong in social and interpersonal relations? Based on that diversity, actually I can also arrive at a very interesting conclusion. And by the way, this diversity is also present in this book, so which I encourage you to have a look one day. So on the one hand, you may see a significant group of Ukrainians, regardless of what language they speak, a significant group of Ukrainians who may be defined as sort of conformists. Yes, so they are willing to follow the leader, the representative authority. Let's put it this way. if they find that authority convincing enough. So this authority, it may be even an oligarch. Yes. So if oligarch speaks to a certain group of people, speak in a very convincing way, and these people are prone to believe to that oligarch, you see, you have already a representative elite for a certain group of people. But the same oligarch speaking to other group of people who, for instance, live in Western Ukraine or Central Ukraine, does not sound that convincing. Yes. For these people, for people in Western Ukraine, in Southern Ukraine, Central Ukraine, other leaders look or seem to be much more authoritative. And it leads to the fact that on the one hand, you have constant competitions between leaders who may be, on the one hand, corrupted, on the other hand, inefficient. And at the same time, you have groups of people who are prone to think emotionally, to a significant degree emotionally, and they are prone to select leaders with comparatively low political culture. So it means that Ukrainian society, based on the diversity, on historical diversity, based on that experience of being a non-historical nation, and living in the environment when the Ukrainian society needs to catch up with time, right now we have 25 years of catching up, you have the situation that the diversity continues dominating the political and social life, and the diversity leads to the emergence of numerous poles of power, to the support of numerous leaders by Ukrainian communities. And some of these leaders, they lack moral qualities of leadership, they lack responsibility, or they lack competencies to perform their functions well. So one of the best examples, one of the most eloquent examples, these are the Euromaidan leaders. For instance, Dmytro Bulatov, yes, who was the leader of Automaidan and who became the Minister of Youth and Sport. I mean, he was very motivated. He tried to deliver the values of Maidan, to institutionalize the values of Euromaidan, to bring them to the cabinet of ministers, yes, to export them, if we may use the word export, onto the Ukrainian territory. He was motivated, but he did not really understand what he was doing. He lacked that culture, the political culture of governance. And I can't define him as a very successful minister. The same applies to other individuals like Mikhailo Havryluk, Kotak Havryluk, and Volodymyr Parasyuk, one of the, again, Euromaidan, Sotnik of Euromaidan. So they were elected as members of parliament in 2014. They came as very motivated and very ambitious individuals. They had support of many Ukrainians, yes, but they did not have experience. And that made them actually devolve into sort of controversial figures, yes. On the other hand, you have a lot of oligarchs whom a lot of Ukrainians despise and do not trust, yes, but these oligarchs, nevertheless, they have support of other Ukrainian communities, yes, and in the environment where there is no sort of strong, unified Ukrainian political identity, in the environment of that the trauma of non-historicism, you constantly have today in Ukraine's political process struggle between leaders, struggle between communities who support different leaders. And these leaders, they may not be motivated, but they may not be competent. They may be poets who decided, for instance, to do something good for their state, but they are poets, they are not policymakers. Or that they are, for instance, street commanders. Again, they are not policymakers. And in this slide, oligarchs can also be treated as representative elites. Yes, the oligarchs have their interests, their values, and but nevertheless, oligarchs still get supported by certain groups of people. And the dramatic moment here is that you have communities, you have leaders, and these communities and these leaders, they are not very willing to find compromise with one another. They are not very willing to speak to one another. They want drastic reforms, they want drastic changes, improvements. They are under pressure of time, but they are not very prone, and they even do not always know how to find a compromise between themselves. And I mean, compromise, I think this is one of the solutions, one of the ways to construct Ukrainian political identity, so nationwide political identity. And apart from that, you have the factor of Russia, because the proximity of Russia and the non-willingness of certain communities in Ukraine, of leaders in Ukraine, willingness to prevent Russian meddling into Ukrainian affairs. Yes, so Russia promotes the tradition, the political culture of very strong leadership, of centralized governance. This is the model of governance which actually brought Russia to glory. Yes, allowed its expansion and secured its global position. While this model does not really work for Ukraine, because Ukraine, as Professor Rudnytsky mentioned, Ukraine is very decentralized, is a state combined from different communities with different backgrounds, different historical or non-historical experiences. So you have, by default, the decentralized environment and decentralized decentralized culture in Ukraine, which is being put under the pressure of centralized government from Russia. So Russia would like to see Ukraine as a very hierarchical state with a comparatively strong and predictable government, while Ukraine as such is not prone to construct a centralized government. And moreover, Ukraine right now is in the process of discovering its indigenous identity, which also, which also derives from that experience of non-historical nation. To make things worse, you have a significant number of leaders, a lot of leaders in Ukraine who actually appreciate Russian political culture, appreciate, the majestic actually tradition of Russian centralized governance. And there are a lot of people in Ukraine who do that as well. And that is one of the reasons why, Russia cannot be fully eliminated. The Russian presence cannot be fully eliminated from Ukrainian, contemporary Ukrainian statecraft, because there are a lot of people who would like to see Russia there. And there are a lot of people today who may understand that Ukraine is at war with Russia, but still who would find the idea of having a truce with Russia, signing some sort of peace treaty, very attractive, even on the expense of Ukraine. Yeah, so that's the other issue to speculate in. I think I won't discuss this in this interview. So what I'm trying to deliver is that because of that non-historical experience, because of the impossibility to develop statehood, indigenous statehood throughout century, because of the poor connection between elites and common people in Ukraine and communities in Ukraine, because of comparatively immature Ukrainian society who expects many changes right away and improvement of life right away, because of the lack of experience in Ukrainian elites and lack of understanding what kind of state Ukraine should evolve into, we have the situation of turbulence. We have that constantly developing political instability. We have the political bandwagoning, ideas changing ideas. We have people shifting sides and poles of their support to different politicians whom they consider representative of different periods of time. So what I think and what I would like to deliver in my article is that because of that trauma of non-historical nation, Ukraine is doomed to be, Ukrainian political life is doomed to be turbulent, because right now Ukraine discovers itself, and this is a painful process. And this is the process which anticipates a lot of U-turns and conflicts, especially in the presence of Russia, especially in the light of overboosted expectations of Ukrainian society, and in the light of inexperienced, contemporary experienced political elites who are also discovering themselves. So that is my major message. So that is the reason for for turbulence in Ukrainian political life today. When I was in Canada, I discovered for myself a lot of very interesting and numerous facts and ideas and events which I was not aware, I had been not aware of. So first of all, my discovery was that Ukrainian historical science in Canada is very developed. So as the person who spent majority of my lifetime in Europe, I must confess I underestimated the contribution of Canadian scholars to Ukrainian science, at least before I just got in touch directly at Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies with their legacy. Now I remember speaking about what is being taught at school. I remember when I was a child and we started, and it's just we started learning the history of Ukraine. That was the non-Soviet history of Ukraine. So these were 1990s. So it's just we started that, we used books written by Canadian historians. So the first books of non-Soviet history, they came from Canada. And right now, I clearly understand that, and I significantly appreciate that. What I did right now to the concept of non-historical nation by Lysiak-Rudnytsky, again, I got inspired by this concept, and I simply decided to give it a thought, yes, to explain and to look into the topic, whether it somehow whether it continues to influence Ukrainian political process today, and if it does, in which way. So I think that this this article at this particular moment of time is probably my intellectual reflection, but I'm not sure that this is the respective Ukrainian pupils and students are being provided at schools, at the universities. I mean, it may be, but it requires another and very specific insight. The nature of human being is such that no one wants to believe that he or she is immature. Therefore, when you're speaking to politicians and when you're speaking to representative elites, let's put it this way, they are usually of high opinion of themselves because they take responsibility, they take responsible posts, they take decisions which influence thousands and millions of people. Therefore, it would be even harmful for them to underestimate their competencies. Yes, but what I'm trying to say is that some of them may be very skillful and very competent, yes, but these elites may be Soviet-bred elites. So, and if you're looking at a Soviet tradition of, educating elites, at Soviet type of elites, I can't define them as, as truly Ukrainian elite. Yeah, so they may be, their culture, their political tradition may be attractive for certain communities in Ukraine, but this cannot be regarded as sort of common ground to establish a political identity. At the same time, you have the post-Maidan elites, very motivated people, very bright people, but who are lacking the understanding of how institutions work, how legislature work. So they are motivated to bring the values of Maidan, which are good values, which are, I mean, promoting humanism and respect to human rights and dignity, but they do not really know how to, yeah. And they are in the process of learning. So what I'm trying to say is that elites today, some of them are competent, some of them are pursuing their interests. They are competent, but maybe pursuing their interests, like Ukrainian oligarchs. Some of them are very motivated, but they are incompetent. And we are right now in that mixture of political culture, mixture of elites, leaders, and societies. We are in the process of discovering of the indigenous Ukrainian structure and system of governance. We are in the process of creating new generation of elites, which can be defined in, I know, in a decade or 2 decades as indigenous Ukrainian elites. Because right now we are still in that transitional process, which came as a consequence of that non-historical experience of Ukraine. Yes, I mean, you have oligarchs which came from business, which use or exploit political institutions to achieve their own interests. But on the other hand, you have still a lot of people who continue pursuing and perceiving these oligarchs as sort of representative elites, as sort of, okay, this is our oligarch. Yeah, we know that he steals, but this is our guy. I understand his or her logics, and you know, he becomes, this oligarch becomes a sort of the representative elite. Yes, though, you know, not without criticism, but you know, here we may say that, you know, sort of market forces work. There is a demand and there is supply. Oligarchs, this is, you know, the part of supply. If there was no demand on the decision making or the political culture as represented by oligarchs, oligarchs would not be supported. So there would be no demand from the society. Yes. So Ukrainian political parties, Ukrainian political leaders, Ukrainian political authorities exist because there is a demand from the society for this type of political representation. Yes. So this may sound brutal. I don't like this, but this is why oligarchs exist in Ukraine. And this is why Ukrainian oligarchs, by the way, very different from Russian oligarchs. Because if you have oligarch in Russia, he or she should be the best friend to President Putin. Otherwise, I mean, you will not be able to actually stay in power and keep your money. In Ukraine, there is, I mean, a diversity of oligarchs. Yes, and some of them are cooperating with one another, some of them are competing with one another. They all are geographically connected to certain regions. And these regions, usually, they represent different historical experience. So people living in these regions and supporting different oligarchs, they represent different historical experience. So Ukraine is, by its nature, it's very decentralized state. There exist multiple poles of power in Ukraine. And these poles of power, they may be represented by oligarchs. They may not be represented by oligarchs. This may be the commanders of voluntary battalions, the Maidan leaders, or the incumbent politicians, or the inspired ideologists who, you know, propagate that they invented the solution to all the trouble. So Ukrainian political tradition is the tradition, first of all, information, and secondly, this is tradition of decentralization, of decentralized governance, multiple poles of governance, which not very often find common language with one another. And that makes Ukraine to be weaker in the light of Russian centralized governance. But that, on the other hand, that makes Ukraine retain that democratic Republican spirit, yes, which is very alien to Russia. It was my pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for remembering about me and for being interested in what I do. Thank you. До побачення.